Hello, everyone. Well, I wasn't going to do a stream today, but then I also didn't expect quite the extent of what we got yesterday, so I figured I'd do something hopefully quite quick today, but you know me, won't necessarily be that quick. Um, Obviously, the move on Bitcoin it's actually not that big. It feels big. It feels big, I guess, because it's big compared to the sideways we had for such a long period of time. And it's big from the perspective that it's gone very deeply into this monthly supply. Put my cursor on. So this whole monthly zone, it's gone very deep inside there. But again, it's not unprecedented and can still make a lower high. Back in this consolidation over here, when we had the bounces, they were all extremely strong bounces up into supply. Additionally, we had, a huge amount of ETF buying in these lower areas, even in here to some extent. Then we had some selling going on at this level, but BlackRock's still buying, and then we basically had nothing for the last 24 hours or very little. So that does make me a little bit wary. So the data is making me quite wary. So if you follow my Telegram channel, you'll know like kind of what I was saying yesterday. The confirmed ETF data is only a small amount of buying yesterday, so there wasn't net selling, so that's good, but only a small amount of buying. We still have these vast, or I actually didn't load these pages before I started recording, so these might take a little bit of loading time, but you're probably used to that too from me. So yeah, what we also had so small buy for there from Wisdom Tree, but again we had a huge amount of grayscale transfers again yesterday. I still have no idea what these are. I found another article saying from the start of May, I think, saying yes, grayscale is having a lot of transfers, but it doesn't seem to point to anything specific, and nobody seems to have made a conclusion from it. So maybe that's not relevant. Maybe that's why. But regardless, we had a small amount of buying from BlackRock yesterday and Fidelity, and overall a small spot inflows there. Then when I was looking at the data, again, give this a moment to load. What we'll see on this is that we were having Coinbase spot CBD was very bad, was selling off the entire up move yesterday. So we can see if that's changed. Now is the price actually looking like that? Yeah, I guess it is looking at that right now. So we've had a small amount of buying coming in since the top, which is not what you want to see either. But all day yesterday. So while we had this rise yesterday, and particularly in New York, we had Coinbase selling off heavily here. On the lower time frame, Binance or the aggregated CBD spot, which I assume is mostly Binance, kind of looked okay. But then when you zoom out of that, um, you can see also that this has had, basically selling going on. I think I did have the hourly chart up yesterday. It was a bit easier to see. Um, but this second, sorry, I've got so much on this chart. But yeah, since those lows at 75k, we had a bit of buying from Binance at the bottom. In fact, so since this high at 95k, we basically just had spot CBD selling off there. So basically, the whole price move has been driven by futures, and you can see the taker volume on futures is on the buy side, so they've been pushing up the price. Um, and then initially, what we saw the day before yesterday, which I commented on, said wasn't necessarily a bad thing, was that longs and shorts were fairly even. So on the earlier pumps, let's go back to the chart. So on some of these pumps that we were having in this range, it wasn't looking too bad. So we were getting some short squeeze, but we weren't heavy on the short side. Sorry, we weren't too heavy on the long side, such that longs potentially were going to get squeezed. I'm opening the wrong one there. Um, but yeah, it was fairly even. But then as of yesterday, it's become a much bigger short squeeze. So you can see again. So let's go to zoom back in. For yesterday's price action, this last up move, you can see that huge drop in OI on the stablecoin margin contracts. A bit less so on the coin margin contracts. I'm not sure how these volumes compare. I need to do the maths, but yeah, at least on the stablecoin margin contracts, you can see there was a big drop in OI. And then I went to look at the ExoCharts data, which basically shows net longs and shorts. This is the one that's much less likely to load, but let's see. Okay, so this is Binance Futures. But again, so just zooming out, so you can see that rise that we had for yesterday. It's very hard to, can't really pull the price down easily on this, but that's sort of all of yesterday and going off the bottom of the screen. But you can see those last couple of pumps that we had, there were big drops in shorts here, and also some longs closing. So we've had on what I did say yesterday is I was kind of like looking for, this obviously hit my zone up here. So I was looking for the potential of a top signal, but one of the comments I made is that I didn't necessarily think there were enough longs going in at the top as yet, because what you want to see is, if futures are driving price rises, or drops if it in reverse, but in this case a rise, then what you want to see is, shorts getting liquidated and shorts getting, shorts continually going in and continually getting crucified. And then it's probably over once shorts stop going in. So like what you see here, shorts were going in all the way up to here and then just started to get knocked off yesterday from New York session. Um, yeah, so then earlier, like Asia was fine, but yeah, by New York sessions, shorts were starting to kind of go in too early and get liquidated. Um, and then so we stopped to have people shorting up here, people who were getting scared. But what you then also ideally want to see, and I think it was around here that I commented, is you want to see longs going in. So you want to see people longing the top because that then provides ammo to then drop it back down again. And you want to see that distribution going on. So we've already got distribution on the spot CVDs. That's been going on for the past, 24 to 48 hours. But then you want to see longs coming in at the top. So we're not seeing a big rise in OI at the moment. Obviously, you can see longs here are rising a little bit. Normally, I look at Bybit here as well, but again, like I think the volumes on Bybit are still significantly lower, but I know some people still very much use the data. Let's see if it loads. You can see the little bouncing abacus on the top right. Maybe it's not going to load for me. It's not the most valuable of data anyway. Here we go. But I think it basically showed the same thing that, um, so if I can zoom out, yeah, you can see over here without having the price on the screen, we had the two pumps and the two big drops in shorts. But again, we haven't got the longs going back in on this yet. This is still very low on the long side. And this is not like none of this data in isolation is an indication for me that it's going to go up or down. But what I'm looking at is just signs that are supporting my thesis that now we've hit supply again. So I'm like, is the data supporting the possibility of a reversal here? And basically, yes, it is. In this case, but that doesn't necessarily mean it is going to revert because obviously data can change at any time. The spot buying could like suddenly pop back in at any time to push this to all-time high. Um, yeah, and I guess like sort of why did this pump happen? The other thing is like I guess it pumped in Asia supposedly because of the UK tariff. Or was that? I mean, I know that because that was London. That was later, so I don't even know why it pumped in Asia. I think there was something tariff related. Um, and then so what we had. So the other thing I was looking at obviously is the indices. Again, please load. A drink break. So again, looking at S&P. We had this pump yesterday morning. These few candles here. So again, Bitcoin was obviously following that. Then we had the second pump in New York session. But then this dropped back down. And one of the things I kind of said is I wanted to see whether the indices were going to create this new 2-day demand. Or whether they were going to close. So I said it was looking like they were potentially going to close as a swing failure. Now, this isn't necessarily the most bearish close, but I guess it's less of a bullish close. So we had the Dow did close slightly over that level. You can see there on the top left. So it did close with a 2-day demand. And as did Japan 225 and Russell. But all the others, I think, closed just very, very slightly below the zone. They'd all also made, like at the end of the day, the other thing I was watching is they'd all made these sort of 4-hour demands here. And then I said, again, we're watching to see if it comes back through them. So again, it has, so the close wasn't great. We have come back through these 4-hour demands, except on Dow, actually, that's still holding. But on S&P and NASDAQ, we did come back through. But again, not exactly a definitive like breakdown at this point on these, but it's just something to be a little bit wary of. But given the pump we had on the crypto market, like it doesn't really compute with me. Is everybody suddenly just buying crypto again? And I guess that it's not something that normally happens. it normally happens a bit more organically. And again, like I said, maybe I'm being exaggerating a little bit because, Bitcoin really hasn't moved, a great deal in Bitcoin terms. It's 10K, so it's about 10%. Um, but, and, again, structurally, while I didn't like the monthly supply and I was wary of looking for longs in here, I had said, that we had this 12-hour zone at the bottom and that was kind of the base of our consolidation. And while we held that, we were still bullish. We ideally wanted a wick down, to take out some of the lows and close the CME gap before this up move. And actually, I would have preferred that because now if we do come down, the chances of us bouncing in this area are much smaller because we have the gap below. Um, and then additionally, we'd made, take my drawings off so you can see. So we've made this 5-day demand by just a tiny hair with that close of the previous candle just above this red one. Again, it wasn't really strong enough. So I get that that's what made this quite challenging for me. We also had this 3-day demand. So again, there were things that all were saying this was bullish. And, so when I look back with hindsight, should I have been more bullish around here? It's hard because, locally, yes, I was like, no, this is not ready for a short. But on the macro, it's still in monthly supply. Um, and and other challenges, again, we did have this swing fail of the low here, but we didn't quite hit into the zones that you would have preferred down there. But again, Bitcoin can front run, has been known to front run many, many times. So yeah. So anyway, it is what it is. Like if you got in along there and you held on, good for you. I think some of the people who claim they did do that, I think for the most part are the people who will just be bullish regardless. There's one person who's claiming, yeah, he was right. He said we'd see 100K, and that's true. But I think he said we'd see 100K from, kind of again from like back here. He's constantly bullish. So if you're actually trying to trade this and trade every swing, if you want to invest, sure, you can just buy wherever you like. We had multiple long entries, some of which ultimately did get wicked out. Unfortunately, didn't get one off the low as it stood. But if you wanted a long in this area on an investment basis, that would have been fine. But to trade it, it's significantly more challenging. Anyway, so now we're up in daily supply. We were in there, like I had the alert. So it actually was. So there were a couple of it was a stacked 2-day. So again, I'd said we might run in here. So we did. We actually run through that last 2-day there, higher into the zone, and we hit this 8-12 hour zone above. I think I'd taken these crosses out in my last. I just had so many crosses all the way up here, but I've kind of added them back because they were on the low time frame chart. Um, Career is structurally slightly lower, but also the structure was very different on Career. It doesn't have a monthly supply. It did have a weekly. It's gone through it. And the CME chart basically looks the same as the US dollar chart. And finally, we have US dollar dominance. So again, this wasn't an ideal area I would wanted to look for longs, but it did hang out here for long enough for me to think we were going to get a move higher off there. But again, sometimes you just don't get the momentum simply doesn't pick up. I had looked at this and kind of thought, maybe we're getting something like this, but then it happened quicker than I expected. And now we're back down, so we've just hit a daily demand at the base here. And there was a week just below, so that was kind of the first area that I was looking properly for. Is this going to get a bounce? And then failing that, we've got monthly below. And I guess the interesting thing here is, relative to Bitcoin, Bitcoin's like almost at all-time high again, but this is obviously relatively higher. So, like if this was aligned with Bitcoin, it would be all the way down here, but it's relatively higher because of the weakness we've had in alts. So it's still interesting to watch, the interplay of the two of them. The other thing was of interest was, and one thing I'd commented on pretty briefly, but again, with hindsight, like I hadn't given this probably enough weight, was that this total chart was the one A that I liked because it had come off actually a decent level at the low. And B, last week, was still floating in this kind of middle of nowhere area, whereas Bitcoin was up here already. And we had, sort of total two obviously now is broken up, but total two, total three, others were still in this weekly supply. Delete some of this. So on the plus side, when you get a breakout, you can then start deleting things off your chart, which is kind of nice finally. But yeah, so all the others were kind of in this weekly supply, whereas total, having broken through that initial weekly already, wasn't really, other than this previous all-time high level, wasn't really at an area I'd look to short this should I be trading this chart. So, again, now with hindsight, this is now in an area that potentially I would look for shorts on the whole crypto market. But I guess we'll see. And again, if we continue to push higher, the other obviously the next obvious area to watch is if this pushes up into here. So maybe we get that all-time high breakout on Bitcoin, but this rejects like for the lower high. Although again, overarchingly, this is still in an uptrend. Still got annual demand down there, 3 months demand that is coming off. Um, what else? So Ether obviously is the big story. So I'll show you. So like I'm slightly irritated by Ether. Like I mean, I obviously I've had a lot of entries, a lot of alerts that have got run through. Weekly level there. Um, but Ether BTC was annoying. So again, I said in the stream, I think 2 or 3 days ago, and all last week, again, we've been wanting for this bounce on Ether BTC, and Ether dominance, had come down and taken out that low. Ether BTC is sort of a little bit higher relative to this structure. Um, and, unfortunately, I hadn't looked at Ether dominance until later yesterday. I'd looked at it kind of before the breakout, and also then it started to break down. But actually, when you look at this was actually a much cleaner breakout or a much cleaner chart. So it had a 5-day demand down there. It's got sort of a 4-day a little bit higher than I marked in, but at that level. Um, and then it made this 4-day and then it just bounced straight off it and straight up. And then also, and yeah, and then just finally has got that big momentum that we occasionally see off Ether. So it's really going to be interesting now. That has gone through a weekly supply, but and it's very unclear here what wave and what zone to look at if you're looking for shorts on this. Probably have to sort of fib it, but I'll have to think about that a little bit. But it's not they're not clear. When you've got clear waves down like this, you can say, okay, well, it's retesting that consolidation area, it's likely to have a drop. It's testing this consolidation area, it's likely to have some sort of a drop or consolidation. But this, it hasn't really, if this wanted to, I guess, arguably short squeeze, if this is something you can short, it could squeeze the whole thing. But then similarly, we have had these bounces before that have looked extremely strong. We've only had a couple of them. And they've consolidated sideways and then ultimately just retraced the whole thing. So this maybe is one of the better ones. It's certainly off a better zone at the low, so I guess we'll see. So but just needs a little bit more development on that. Similarly, so again, the other thing is, is others going to follow? If Ether is our indicator of alt season. Let me see what the little Arkham alt season indicator is saying. Actually, I found this little, I have no idea what it's based on, but this little indicator on the Arkham dashboard um, that says whether it's alt season or not. I hope I've still got it on there somewhere over here. Here we go, alt season. Well, it's 28%. It was down to 14 at one point, so I guess that's improving. But also, again, what these indicators is everything, is the whole market going to be green, and then finally this is going to go 80% or 100% when it's blindingly obvious that we're in all season anyway. I don't know. Um, so yeah. Anyway, at the moment, others dominance. So BTC dominance did take a bit of a drop. Obviously, we're now seeing, and today again, we're now seeing. Actually, it's more of a drop than I thought. I've done some movement since I've been sitting by the pool this morning. Um, but it came up and hit the 2 month level inside this 6 month that we've been watching. And typically, the thing is, once we see this, I mean, I guess when we do see this drop off, we are seeing a bit of alt season. But for most of the last couple of years, what we see is a little bit of alt season, and then this picking back up again. But this is mainly because then alts are dying and US dollar dominance is taking it. But Bitcoin's been holding regardless. So again, I'm not overly excited by the possibility of alt season. I mean, Ether dominance is at least giving us a better sign than previously. I need to kind of map all these things together to see how they look. But at the moment, again, so others' dominance, I wasn't overly confident of holding this level, but for now we are. But we do still have, weekly supply above, and I said, that we have, we're kind of a bit in no man's land here for me. Like I'd look for shorts on the market if we get a retest up here, and longs on the market if we get a test down here. Um, so we'll just need to see, it's up to you what you want to trade in this little range, but this isn't really telling me much at the moment other than we're back coming into resistance, having come off the bottom of the range. And I think total DeFi is similar. So this is slightly better, at least, this was coming off 2 weekly demand at the low. So maybe DeFi's got a bit more hope. I guess we'll see. Um, And then yeah, so others total three, total DeFi, etc. So I just need to see a bit more from them. So we have come through this weekly supply finally. I need to see from a higher time frame perspective. I need to see the weekly closes not die. We do have this nice inverse head and shoulders, which I've talked about in one of my previous streams. Was hoping these wicks would come lower, so that's kind of the only thing that's really sort of thrown me off from the alts perspective is that I really wanted to see but I say that I would have liked this chart to come back down into there, and that's the other thing that makes me nervous. The fact that hasn't come down into there. Yes, it could mean the market's super strong, but it also can mean we do this before going back up. Um, so now, while I'm more bullish on this, we have wanted a retracement for a while. We've got untested zones up here. Um, but when we do, so you can see, for example, over here, this is a different time frame, but it's that similar structure that I talked about on Ether, actually, but it's come back through to test presumably lower zone down here. It hasn't held after the initial bounce. But having said that, what I wanted was for us to break this last down move, which we have. So assuming we can actually hold up here, so it's not a swing failure on the weekly, that's a good thing. And then we need to see what new demands made. So a lot of alts have made, or the majors at least look like this. They've made a new 4-day demand in here. It's not the world's best because in most cases it's made up of two candles. But what I really want to be seeing is this weekly confirm by the end of the week. That's important for this to have any continuation for me. If this dies, today certainly today would be bad, but even Saturday, Sunday, it's not ideal. At least, although if it holds today, we're going to see, Bitcoin and Ether, have, I think, probably high time frame demand below on the CME charts. So yeah, we need a little bit more follow up on that, and so this has apparently closed above that level on the daily and has bounced off the zone on the others chart. So we are seeing, so finally I'm seeing some of my alt charts, the zones break. It's the first time in a while. So that's good in a way, well, I say the zones break, but I actually really just mean from the perspective that, where my alerts are going, they're just not having a reaction. But that obviously is a good sign for the alt market. It shows that we're getting some strength back in. But again, just need that continuation because, so far we're not really getting an awful lot of continuation. And also, I guess we have had a decent up move here now on alts, are we, and then that's my other concern that so many alts now are coming back into monthly, 3 monthly supplies that I've talked about. This particular chart, the monthly is higher, so at least we have a bit of space in here. But it's on, it's in a weekly zone currently inside. Update this chart while I'm here. So now coming up into a weekly zone again, the chop makes it a little bit harder to judge. There's not enough space. So we've had this pump. It came a little earlier than I wanted, but I did manage to get some entries on well, quite a few alts actually. So then finally let's go on to Ether. So Ether obviously has had the most significant move. So obviously we see that on total two. So total two's finally got a big push up into this weekly supply. And again, may or may not create weekly demand depending on the close. It was a better looking chart from a major demand perspective, whereas others in total DeFi had come much deeper. And total three, this had held a little bit higher. So I talked about ether dominance already. And again, the challenge on this, and again, now we've gone through quite a few zones here. So actually, so this is now in a weekly supply. So obviously we didn't have that zone in the same way on where ether dominance actually I think had gone through the zone, the immediate weekly. But so again, this is like I was watching this all weekend, so this is just again quite annoying. And I commented on this certainly in one of the last streams that this had made. So I think we did have no, we had a 3-day demand in there made by a very tiny hair, and it did bounce off the top of it, which you can see on the lower time frame. Also had a 2-day in here, but obviously it became choppy, and then just rather annoyingly that Monday drop that we had, which I expected. But again, not necessarily in the BTC pair, but I wanted a bigger drop. Ether gave a reasonable drop, hence we had this. But then Tuesday finally has like done the massive breakout. But like I say, as you can remember, if you remember the ether dominance chart, so it was much clearer. Like it had created the 4-day demand and then it bounced off it before going. Whereas this chart obviously has just gone. which obviously ether has a tendency to do, and it's difficult like that. So I think, and I've said that before, with ether, you basically just have to kind of hit and hope. You just kind of guess that, right, this is now going to be it. You put your stop below here, and you just wait and see what happens, because quite often it won't let you get back in, at least not on that first initial bounce anyway. Certainly later it will come back. So like it's unusual, here we had that big pump. So, let's say arguably we're here. It then took however long, 3 or 4 months to come back down, or is that really that long? So hold on, it pumped in September and then January, yeah, so 5 months, 6 months, came back down, and then before the next move up. Similarly here, like I had a very quick pump, and then 6 months before it actually fell off the cliff again in that case. So, um, I mean, and maybe there's an exception; it doesn't have to do exactly the same way. Could get something like that, and it just runs without us. But then, if it does, so be it. For me, I'm waiting for retests. So obviously now this is coming off a weekly supply, still in a weekly downtrend, but obviously a decent candle. So either we want this to break above and then we buy a retest. Um, that would be perfect world, because then we've broken a weekly structure. Um, and or it's going to come back down. We see they come back down slowly, much like we saw on these over here to the left. We see it come back down reasonably slowly. It holds demand, and then we look for entries like later in here. Um, or, and not even necessarily that low. The other alternative is obviously that it just consolidates through here and it gives us something locally that we can trade. So let me try and find an example. See what it did the previous. So for example here, obviously this wouldn't have been the best one, but it did create a 12-hour demand here. So then obviously you can then FOMO in on that entry and look for another move up if you do think it's potentially going to go higher. But you have to wait for that local demand to be formed first. Um, Similarly, yeah, it's not an 8-hour. There'll be something in there because I can tell by the wicks, but maybe a 4-hour or a 2-hour even. Again, it's pick that up for another up move. So again, you need to go down to the lower time frames on this and see, if it's given a case as a 2-hour and then it's a 2-hour back down here at the monthly level. So those are the kind of like the lower time frame zones that you can potentially look to get back along if you really want to aggressively enter. On the US dollar pair, obviously, wow. Okay, so this is interesting. So this has really moved today actually since I've been relaxing. So this has hit 2 months supply on CME pair. So that's kind of interesting. Um, and it had closed below and it had run back up inside it on this candle. So this is a level that has been tested, and it has been tested as a wick on this on the normal US dollar chart. We've got a CME gap slightly higher. That's the low of the gap, and then that's the close. So like if we wanted to close the whole gap, so the reason I put the low in, it's even, oh, when I put it, yeah, it's actually at that level, isn't it? The reason I put the low in is because sometimes we come back, and you can see that happened here. That sometimes we come back and we find resistance and we don't actually fill the gap, but we find resistance at where the gap started. So that's why I tend to leave the gaps, the gap low in or the gap high. Um, so like similarly here, for example, that's the top of the gap. What am I talking about? No. Yeah, so you might find support, at the top of the gap, on the first candle that's opened afterwards, which in this case has happened as well at the other end. So anyway, so CME's obviously had a decent move up there. Interesting. Let me see what Korea's doing just before I look at the US dollar pair. Korea also, so yeah, this was another thing I commented on yesterday. Korea has 3 month supply, quite a lot lower, to leave that line in there. So it's in a local 5-day supply here. But it also had a 3 month supply, and it was quite a lot lower than where the US dollar pairs 3 month supply. So US dollar pairs at 2,600. I say quite a lot lower. It might actually be there now, so I need to go have a look at that. But I did say structurally it was possible they would actually hit at the same time. Okay, so I can delete some of these fibs now. So the 61 fibs it's not really caring about this time around. Well, this was the next kind of level. So I eventually took off. I had another alert in on this hourly and eventually removed that. So I just thought this is going up with far too much momentum and aggressiveness. So it came through 3 day supply. Then I was like the possibility of a swing failure on here when I thought it might slow down because the indices had slowed down last night. But no, it kept going. Then it hit the 4 day supply, and it did have quite nice confluence here with BTPCC hitting that at the top, but obviously has now pushed even higher. But the thing on this, okay, so again, 3 month supply up here. This is like as a higher time frame again. I mean, this is the reason I circled that across there. You may or may not recall if you've watched some of my streams, is because that was, the first the weekly zone inside 3 month supply. So 3 month supply is very slightly lower at that level. Um, sorry, at that level at 2600. And then we have 2 month at 2516, but we'd already had a wick go to the 2 month. So when the 2 month was created, we had this wick very slightly up inside it to start with. So again, I was looking at, either the prospect of taking out this monthly high um, on a swing failure for a potential short, so at 25,550, and or then potentially coming up into this 3 month above. But this was like my higher probability if you were going to look for, because there was so many possible entries all the way up here, having not tested anything all the way down. That there was the prospect of running through everything, which obviously it's run pretty high in there now. I think I will delete that actually because it's just in the way. Um, and Yeah, and then finally, we have the 61 fib. Let me check this. I'm on the linear chart. So the 61 fib was up around this was the 2 month flip level. So when we initially had a 2 month supply from over here, when we came up here, we came through it and flipped it to support. We went back up, took out that high, and then came back down and closed back down below on the 2 month. So what we then have the prospect of is that level finding that can be found as resistance on a retest. So that was kind of my next level of interest, hence why the question mark is not typically a level I would use. And I would generally only use it if, sorry, let me just go back so you can see a bit better. But I would generally only use it if there was a supply there. And this supply in this case is very slightly higher. And my preferred supply would have been a bit higher again. Plus the 61 fib was in the area. So again, that was kind of my next level of interest if we were going to run. Um, but from where we are now, like, yeah, okay, now we've gone this high, it would be nice to have that little extra push into the zone. But really, I mean, this is probably overly due a cool off. So similar to Bitcoin again, should I predict this? Yes, possibly, because, I didn't know that Ether, BTC was at that major demand. But again, that's like when you've had so many false starts on things not bouncing and so much time is taken in consolidation. Like sometimes I kind of, I'm guilty of this a few times. Probably my biggest flaw actually, of then just forgetting. Not forgetting, that's probably too strong, but just being so used to, oh, we're going sideways, and this is probably going to go back down again and test here, that you then get sort of like taken by surprise by a big move. So in the case of Ether, again, from a structural perspective, it had a daily that was bounding this up move. I then was looking for a long on this daily, and the new daily demands around on the 2 day chart. So the daily that bound the up move here, it did have stops underneath. So again, I would have preferred an entry, down in this zone where the CME gap was. And that's what I was looking for. But again, it just made higher lows through here. This was a challenging area similar to Bitcoin. So again, it still was hit this daily demand, still held this daily demand, but only got a little bounce, came back deeper before pushing up, and then finally breaking out. Um, and so yeah, from now from this perspective again, like I need to see more follow up PA. Obviously, you can't be longing this, immediately. Now I'm kind of looking for structure for shorts. If you want to take scalps, that's up to you. It's completely different. It does have a new 4 hour demand in here, so um, I just need to see a bit more structure before I can look and see what kind of direction I want to trade. Are we going to then start forming another consolidation like this, which is going to give me a decent demand to work from? And until then, we'll see a bounce on this 4 hour demand down here if we get back there, if it bounces. I can see we've also got a monthly level here as well. Oh yeah, I think that's what this was, the previous monthly demand, which again got broken. So it'll be interesting to see if that flips to support as well. That was actually sort of one other thing I didn't comment on Bitcoin. There's the same situation on Bitcoin, that it's now come up over what could potentially end up as a monthly demand at a later date, this 102,350 level. So again, just watch for that to kind of retain as support. So this is also made a 4 hour demand. smashing up the pool outside my room now. Um, yeah, so this could become a 4 hour demand. But sorry, this could break down. So if this breaks down, then you're looking for a short, obviously. There's another 4 hour demand. Actually, that this isn't a 4 hour. This is a 2 hour. It was because of that little gap that we had on the BitMEX data yesterday. But yeah, just watch out for this brown level here, the monthly, and then what was also the linear 161 fib, which I was looking at for tops previously. Um, watch out for that to become support. Um, yeah, one other thing on Bitcoin quickly actually is that, did I mention this a minute ago? One sec, also just let me close the door. I'll be back in 2 minutes. Sorry about that. And looks like they're smashing up paving stones around the pool. Um, yeah, sorry, I can't even remember if I mentioned this a minute ago. So, as you know, like I previously talked a lot about the failed wave, which is generally the 131 fib or 131 to 127 area. There were many examples that I've given in the past, from back over here when we had a failed wave. We have failed waves on the lower time frames, and they're good top indicators. So there's one from the macro here, and then there were multiple on the lower time frames even within here of looking at 131 fibs. So I've just drawn those boxes in just to be aware. Like one's the linear 131, and the other one's the log 131. I think the linear is very slightly lower. Yeah, the linear is just that lower box. So again, those are just potential areas I'd look for shorts if we come into that area. But again, you're going to have to look at confirmation. There's no reason for it to be a failed wave. It might just be a breakout. Um, so yeah, so that's kind of it for now. I think on those on the higher time frames at Willie's. Yeah, just I guess quick recap of the lower time frame charts, which mostly just look sort of completely obliterated. So that was the short here on the 8-12 hour. Then there's possibility of taking out some highs. So I've got possible swing failure levels, obviously all time high, and then also just these two wicks up here as possible other levels if we push more. Um, what else? Yeah, that was the 2 day supply that just kind of just got a bit of a consolidation and eventually got run through. Um, and that's Bitcoin, and then Ether. Yeah, again, just in the interest of transparency, like the craziness that was Ether. So I guess we had that long entry there. I also did say to long here, but I didn't get around setting an alert on it. But I had that on the stream, so I did at least give a long entry on that. But then, obviously it's just kind of this zone. I can't remember what that was. Oh, I think it was just a 4 hour over here that hadn't been tested just in case it was going to just like do a three hits to the high, small wick up. Then it was just challenging because there were so many levels. Unfortunately, I've deleted most of them now, but I think that, there was certainly a weekly. I think there were weekly and 3 day levels in here, but it's consolidated very close. So what I like is when we consolidate, let me show the 3 day quickly. Um, this tends to be better than, and is what quite often happens. So what I tend to not like, people talk about like if there's consolidation at resistance. So if we have had consolidation at this cross, sorry, this arrow here, I would have thought this is going to come back down. Like my preference, in fact, is for it to consolidate below. So resistance is higher there. You can see the 3 day, and I think the weekly was a little under the 3 day, but the weekly had already been tested anyway. But to consolidate below resistance, and then you get the impetus to get that real move straight up through resistance. And possibly because the people who were trapped in longs here are just they think it might come down, so they get out early. I don't know. So then the resistance is reduced or the supply is reduced in that area, and then it can just run through everything. Then similarly, we had, I think, 4 or 5 day supply at that pink line. We had possibility of swing failure over these highs. Again, on that 3 day, so it's again just to be aware, like I had said, I want a quick rejection of this level if it was going to happen because we had these trend line stops here. But yeah, I mean, I've got to say, I certainly didn't anticipate this big a move on Ether. So while Bitcoin isn't that big, this is pretty huge for Ether. It's very huge now. Um, so yeah, and so we've got a green arrow up there where the 3 month supply is, again, should it go higher? And there's a weekly just above that. And then, obviously there's various zones above, and as I've said, like we don't want to kind of reverse knife catch. If we are like running in front of a moving train of a massive pump. So really now I just need to see more on this. on how it's going to play out because, yeah, obviously, very, very big move for a single day. So we see big moves like this in the past, but it's uncommon to have it a single day be that big. Normally we'd have like, sort of a 12-hour candle and then a bit of consolidation, or at least a 4-hour candle and some consolidation, etc., etc. Um, yeah, so I haven't really added anything on the lower time frames. Okay, so on the long side, what I do like at least is that, now this level is now at the 70 fib. But again, I just need to think this through. So like Ether and Bitcoin both have this new four-day demand down here. And again, it's just a question of are we going to go through and take those stops? Let me go back to the higher time frame charts for these. So for long entries, um, again, we've got 5-day demand and weekly demand down here, and this CME gap fill level, if we were to take stops into there, which would coincide quite nicely with 70 fib. So, obviously, I don't have no idea if we're going to come all the way back down here. Now we've got this momentum, maybe it is just going to keep going, true crypto style, but just need to see a bit more follow up before making a judgment on that. As I've said, I don't like the Bitcoin data. Like I would have liked to have seen spot buying supporting that up move. So, and yeah, also again, like I say, we've got the gap a little bit higher on the CME, so maybe we'll get another push. But we do also have Korea hitting 3 month supply here. So again, yeah, I don't want to be looking for longs on this particularly until we get at least some significant drop and also some consolidation, as I described on Ether BTC, that gives me local long entries on a reasonable time frame. Bitcoin's basically the same. Again, I've stuck with for now at the moment. I haven't really I thought about Ether a bit more than this. Um, I still don't like this structure terribly. So while we did have another push and we were looking for 3 hits to the high, that's more than 3 hits to the high. That's another breakout. Um, so I need to sort of see, but from a fib perspective, where we are right now, again, has a 70 fib taking out the stops of that zone. So that's again like a reasonable place to look for longs. And then again, maybe we'll get an interim bounce either on this zone or in that CME gap area. Um, so yeah, and again, you can be all excited about the breakout if you want. The structure is a bit different, but do just be conscious that what we had over here, that when we had this big push, for example, through here, it did eventually fall down and break the low. And all of these kind of did retrace multiple times after the initial bounces. This is a little bit different. It has consolidated for longer. It has come down to a more significant probably demand area, although again, in fact, this eventually came to a weekly, but this slightly front run, but at least in that grayscale, for example, has hit 3 months demand. Um, yeah, so there's pros and cons, but for me again, still just trading alts because it's way better. So I'll do a quick run through of the majors while I'm here. So the other indication of this breakout actually, which I really should have been more cognizant of because I remembered I did see it. Come back mouse was Litecoin. So Litecoin on Monday pumped. So when everything else was kind of doing that drop on Monday, Litecoin pumped. And Litecoin obviously can be a lead indicator for the rest of the market. So I should have been more like I did notice it. But the thing is, again, like it had been slightly annoying because go back down to the 12-hour because it had done this sort of slightly, I thought it was again stronger here, but then it did drop back with everything else. Um, oh, that's Tuesday. Sorry. Tuesday it pumped. But it pumped sort of anyway. Basically, this pump is before everything else pumped. And but it had this kind of like had this quick move up here when everything else was looking shitty again. I was like, oh, what's Litecoin doing? But then it just kind of caught up with everything else later. Again, didn't come into my demand zone, but take that out now. Um, but yeah, anyway, maybe that could have given me a better indicator that Bitcoin was going to do something more significant. Like once I saw this happen, just a bit too caught up with alts yesterday and trying to keep on top of my watch list. Anyway, this has got a 3-day supply coming, and then weekly, 2 weekly above various zones coming. As I've said before, we're on this 2 month demand. I wanted it to come down deeper inside, and we did get that to take out some of these stops. Probably would have liked a little bit more, but yeah, but it's approaching a new supply now, so we've got interested to see what the reaction is there. Um, all of these, I should say, are going to likely at the moment to create weekly demands, new weekly demands. All I think the vast majority of the majors, old and new, and virtually all of them have 4-day, 2-day, 1-day from yesterday. So again, need to see. I need to really have a think about them because this is obviously again these are pumped more quickly than I expected. So and also I need to think about kind of whether they're in major zones. So BCH for example, we were bullish on this coming off 6 month demand, but then confused because it wasn't in also in 3 month supply. So I was biased to the short side here. At least this I did manage to get these aggressive longs here and here. If anybody wanted to take that, and this has now come back up into the next zone. It hadn't. Let me just check what the. Okay, so it has just tapped the bottom of this zone here. Is that a weekly? No, it's a 5 day. So this could still come up higher. The Coinbase chart, that wick is significantly higher. So while the perps chart, has really just tapped off the bottom here. So just be conscious this might come back a bit higher again. You can see it's got that 4 day, and again it's potentially got a 5 day demand. It's got a 4 day there. It's like there's a lot of chop in here. So yeah, I really need to see what kind of tests we're going to get on these levels. I also still don't love on any of these that we've got zones underneath that didn't get tested. And when I look back at previous PA, yes, sometimes we get things like this where it goes out, but more often we get, this. So in this, for example, and this came back for the lower low, but when that wick came down and it just missed testing this zone, it went back up again, but then it did come back and test this zone. I mean, ultimately it took out the zone in that case. Um, but generally when we see bounces, and this is another case of the COVID drop, but it's another reasonable example again, we got a bounce, we made a zone here, we went up, we came back, we didn't quite test that zone, went up again, and then came back down fairly heavily into that area. So just be careful. Always be careful anyway, but like being particularly careful, don't get like sucked into this is alt season forever. Don't forget that alts are in the vast majority of cases in 1 month, 2 month, 3 month supply. Less so on these majors, but either way. So anyway, this watch for a wick up to 455 if we do get a little bit more of a push on BCH on the perps charts. Else it's already at a zone that we can look for potential shorts on. LTC, like I said, has got a little bit further. Ripple, actually, so I had an alert here on this 3 day zone and actually didn't quite tap that when the alert went off. I didn't reset it because, this chart is probably too bullish to be looking at second tests on things. Again, it had made a weekly demand. We've got 2 entries off into that 5 day and weekly demand below, so that's pretty decent. So yeah, again, I just need to see some follow up on this. There's a new 4 day demand in there as well. Um, there's another 4 day demand in here as well. So again, just need to see what kind of tests we're going to get in this area. So I need to probably go back and and throw in some more alerts. And again, just think about structures. This is very much a sort of sideways structure, so it's a bit more difficult, as we've seen with Atom. And then finally EOS. So EOS. Again, I had an alert here, and to be honest, this was again far too long. That alert was in. There was a 4 hour supply up here, so it did kind of pause for a while yesterday, but has eventually now taken out that high. It does have this 5 day and 4 day supply up here that hasn't been tested. EOS, it's coming off this monthly demand at the lows, but obviously is in this kind of epic long-term downtrend. Oh, I thought it wasn't loading. I thought we had more history than that. Maybe there is on another chart, but I can see the dinosaur showing that's when the price starts. There must be some more on another chart because we've got that green line there because that was a previous all-time low. And I hadn't really liked the EOS BTC chart, but I need to go back and have a look at how the BTC charts have fared with this pump yesterday because that's kind of interesting. With EOS there, I can see well today is 0, but it's obviously this isn't including now the percentage for the pump from yesterday. But I want to see how those BTC charts are looking now to see if we've also got any breakouts on those, which could support more movement. So again, it's not ideal if we do swing fail here because then obviously we could then potentially come down and take out the low of this wave. So again, we just need to see on that, but also in an area that I potentially look for short. So I guess all of them Litecoin a little bit further, but all of them are broadly Aurea areas that I would then look for the next short. Tentatively on XRP and on EOS, more firmly on BCH, and yeah, like I say, Litecoin had a little bit further. So from a confluence perspective, it's sort of maybe 75%. Then these other ones, so BNB, Link, Doge, and ADA obviously were the ones that they're the four more bullish charts. Although ironically the others have probably moved a bit more, but they were the ones that I was bullish on just based structurally. So Doge and BNB are on annual demand, and Link is too, but Link came down deeper inside. But Link now is on a 6 month, as is ADA. So they're on sort of major demands. But again, the timing is always super awkward. BNB I became more bearish on because I didn't like the BTC pair. But again, I need to go back and look at that. Now, obviously, that long entry at the low there worked out pretty nicely. And yeah, the next zone of interest was this 3 week up here. But again, we've had quite a lot of consolidation before getting there. So a little bit less certain of that now. But again, yeah, just see what happens in this area. Link again. So I mean, like these, while again we've had a breakout, I need to look at the structures to see, like what's. So I guess in this case, we've broken weekly supply on Link. I probably shouldn't have deleted the zones so quickly, but similar to as I was saying on others, like I don't want this to close as a swing failure of this weekly breakout. It needs to close as a strong candle, and it needs to close with a new weekly demand. But my short entries on this are significantly higher, and again, so any shorts on these four pairs, possibly with the exception of BNB, I'm more wary of because of the fact we're coming from major demands. BNB I'm also wary of for the same reason, but I'm just that BTC pair or not. BNB is just pretty horrible. So yeah, anyway, there's no short there on Link for me at the moment, except again if there's a swing failure. Doge the same, it's come back up into a 3 day supply, but it's a supply that's already been tested. So again, if it wants it, it has space to run higher. Next alert will be up at weekly zone here, and I think there's obviously a historic 2 month level at that level, and then there's a monthly higher, if it really wants to take off. And again, has broken a weekly supply, is coming off really nice off the lows. And I was just sad on these because like these didn't hit my weekly demand entries. I think all of them I had entries on, except for BNB, which did hit. But Link had an entry on the 4 day, was just a bit too conservative. There was a weekly higher, but it is what it is. Doge the same. I had a weekly alert there. It just didn't quite get down to that level, and ADA the same. So again, do be conscious on these. If we do end up with swing failures on the highs, if this is just a sort of an epic fake out, then we could well go back and take out these lows into those weekly demands. And we have seen that multiple times before. And you can see it even on ADA, and this is much more extreme version, but ADA went all the way through monthly supply, took it out, came back down and closed back below, and then flipped, in fact, made a weekly supply and flipped it back to supply before its secondary drop. And could also reject here back at that monthly level when it comes back up to there. At the moment, I think my alert on this is a little bit higher. But again, yeah, so in a 2 week supply, in fact, now potentially going to make a new weekly demand. So on all these, I just want to see the weekly close. If we get a strong weekly close, I'll be more inclined to look for aggressive longs here. But at this stage, and if we get a swing failure on the weekly, then I'll be looking for re-entries on a retracement of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and have that as a fifth wave, and then an A, B, C. But maybe we'll get, this is your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then maybe we'll get an A, B, C. But that would be still my preferred potential long entries. But we'll see. And again, like if they still push significantly from here, then maybe I'll have to reconsider, and then if I get in later. But again, we're traders, I'm not investors, so that makes no difference to me. Like I've said, if you wanted to get in these, the time to get in from an investment perspective is at the lows. Now, when we're trading them for risk to reward, we're not investing. So if we miss the trade, there'll be another trade. And then finally, Dotsol, Anir, and Atom. So these were obviously the disappointments. So they came off. So near Dot and Atom, I had alerts on the 2 day supplies. All of them just got blasted. And again, like I say, that happens. All of them also I had was way more conservative on the long side. So near and Dot I think just bounced on daily demands, the first daily demand, whereas my alerts were 4 day, 5 day on near a bit lower, and in fact I just was going way more conservative and looking for a possibility of a lower low, mainly because Dot also has 3 months supply. But obviously there's a blasted up through. They've now made 4-day demands. Maybe, yeah, in fact, Dot has as well. I just haven't drawn it in yet. Um, so they've all made 4-day demands of varying heights. Even Atom, the bane of my existence, ran through that 2-day supply. Um, and yeah, so again, they remain interesting. Atom, like I say, has always been the bane of my existence. I've just been trading it too aggressively in this range, and it's really been 50-50, to be honest, on the outcomes. It is back up in 3 months supply here, so this is not something I want to long at all. But maybe it's going to go higher in 3 months supply, but again, it could also just reject where it is now. And it's still in a kind of a poor weekly supply here for now. Um, Dot now also is in 3 months supply. So again, similar to Atom, it's a huge zone. Um, and it hasn't really come off anywhere significant at the lows. So like I really am, it's still erring on the bearish side on this. And Yeah, so the other thing I should can kind of see while I'm here, the other thing is I can see this is potentially going to create a 3-week demand. So that's the other thing. So while also on the weeklies, in fact, it's currently still in 3-week supply. Um, but all of the alts now should be checked. This is what you see when you see that 3-week demand get taken out. And, maybe we're going to get something like this. We get a really strong 3-week candle and then it doesn't come back and test it, similar to here. Slightly different structure because we do have the 3 month supply on this. And maybe this didn't have anything really significant there. So, but, we can just have a big up move. Maybe we're going to have another week or so, a big up move, then just some sideways consolidation before another push. But I need to see that happen first and just look for entries on that basis. But yeah, I do have the possibility of a short in this area on Dot. It's 3-day supply and there's a 3 month, but just be cautious with this because there are, then I've got the next alert, which is not set for the moment, but I think that's a 4-day in there. If it does come up and take these trend line stops, which again is something I've wanted for a while on this, but this is 4-day supply. That would be the next level inside the 3 month, but then obviously, so if we're talking the 3 month, it can come all the way up here if it wants to. So we're just looking at the reactions. And now if we are going to start seeing alts break zones, then I'm going to need to be significantly more careful on the short side. So whereas recently I've been more careful on the long side, we're close to that point, then maybe I'm going to have to be more cautious on the short side, and let things go higher in zones and perhaps zones are going to break. Having said that, like I still am not going to be looking for longs on things like Dot, which are in 3 month supply. Sol's another one. So Sol also is in 3 month supply. So this is kind of a good example, I guess, that I had this 3 month alerted for the possibility of the swing failure of these lows. Like eventually it actually took out that high, and eventually took out those highs as well. But again, didn't drop very much and has now come up higher in the zone. So this is still overarchingly in a big 3 month supply. It did come off a monthly demand. So again, there's an indecision. But again, like I'm cautious of looking for longs on this over other things. Like I would rather, like if you're going to long something, you're in a long market. I would rather long something that isn't in 3 month supply. If the whole market's going up, then Sol will probably go up too. And maybe it'll go all the way up to the top of here before rejecting. But I would much rather long something that doesn't have the risk of all this that it's got to get back through, and all the people that longed in this top section thinking we were going to, $1,000. Because there are plenty of other coins that don't have this kind of history and don't have this kind of structure. Yeah, anyway, so that's my rant over. I had another alert here for this weekly. I didn't love it, so I'll show you. So obviously you can see it looks clean on the weekly there, so that's why I had the alert. But I obviously did put in the alert that I don't like that we had this Trump pump. And it's kind of left broadly almost equal highs above the zone as well. Plus, we've got a monthly supply up here untested. So yeah, just again, be cautious on this. Maybe we're going to get a drop from here back into demand, and then we'll get another entry. I don't know. Another one. This is so similarly with Sol. Like this didn't hit. I wanted this to hit 3-day weekly demand down here, and again, had a bit of kind of tests on lower time frames here, but didn't get low enough for my long entry there. So yeah, I'm going to have to look at these a bit more, and like I say, look at the BTC pairs. And yeah, see what we've got from that. Obviously, I've had another, 50 alerts hit overnight. So much for getting up to date with my May alerts as of yesterday. We have seen, so of these, let me just run through them really quickly. Like I'm not going to go through all of them, but just so we just so you can see, because like I want to see which ones have broken out or not, which ones have actually broken supply. Because I haven't looked at them all as of today. I really should go through the whole list of all the ones from earlier in May, but I'll just look at yesterday's alerts, and then you can see also again the zones that I've been looking at. So Vine, obviously, I charted this yesterday. I wanted a trend line breakdown here, which we got. I then set the alert for the retest, which I didn't get, and then I had a short alert here for 4 hours supply. There's a couple of stacked ones in here. And then I did also say this, could potentially run through because there's a 2 hour untested above. So it did give an initial reaction, but down into 2 hour demand, and now it's gone back higher. So you can keep an eye on that on the short side. But back to the start of the list. So yeah, like I said, I'm not going to do the full detail on this. I just want to see kind of what may or may not have broken out. Because again, I'll just highlight. So, like we hit this, for example, had a 5 day supply. So when I alerted virtually all of these, I've kind of got its 5 day and then weekly supply or 2 weekly supply. So in this case, it has a 4 day, 5 day, then a week, then a 2 week, and it's been hard to know exactly against market timing as to exactly where something like that may reject. So in this case, no, I wouldn't consider this a breakout. It's still in kind of a consolidation area. Like obviously, it's broken this supply. Um, it may create a new 5 day demand. So again, like all of these, it's looking, are we going to create new weekly, new 3 weekly, new 5 day, new 4 day? How aggressive are we going to be on the long side? And I'll be more aggressive on the long side for things like this that doesn't have the history over something like Sol, which has 3 months of supply up here. Alice was a more aggressive one, so I wouldn't be surprised if this had broken. Okay, it hasn't broken, but it's coming up inside it. So this is again, I had this when the market was looking a bit weaker. I thought maybe we'd get a test into this 3 day supply and then drop lower on this. Still in a downtrend below that weekly supply. So again, that hasn't broken, but is obviously very high in the zone. Take some of these levels out. So it's obviously come up high in this 3 day supply, but hasn't actually broken it yet. So I can see what's going to happen on that later. Like I know at least one of these is broken, but actually I don't know if there's any more than that. Okay, so this has broken. So this I had an aggressive alert on weekly supply there. And so obviously that's come up into 5 day. But again, could still close as a swing fail here. Like I don't know if this is going to be a breakout or not. I've lost my mouse again. I have set an alert on this anyway, where the orange circle is currently stuck, to potentially get a long re-entry and aggressive, well, not aggressive, but a risky long re-entry. It was risky at the point I set the weekly, when it was a weekly supply anyway. So let me just have a quick look at that. So yeah, what you want to see on this is it going to flip this weekly supply to demand by the end of the week? So again, that's what I'm going to be looking at. Are these also going to hold? This isn't really strictly a breakout. It's kind of broken that wave, but it hasn't closed significantly above as yet. So I just need to see it a little bit more. And this area here with the one minus that giant wick is kind of what's holding the price down at the moment. So it's still a sideways consolidation, really. BGSC is one that dropped. So this is a long entry. A bit of a risky long entry based on that kind of weird ass structure you've got going there. But it is a 3 week demand. I think I had a 12-hour demand alert, but I think since then it's made various other zones. But yeah, if the market's getting strong, again, something you can look at for long entries. BNT, okay, so BNT I know is one that has gone high in the zone. So I have had 2 alerts go on this. So I did have the initial alert. So this is going to be the problem. So I had the initial alert on the 3 month supply here. Obviously, you can see on this it had a whole bunch of wicks over here. So it's not overly surprising it's gone to take out those wicks. Then I had an alert for this daily inside the 3 month. And obviously it's kind of like wick through that now as well. And then we've got now 5 day and weekly supply up here as well, and monthly by the looks of it. So let me see what I've alerted. Yeah, I put 4 day supply more aggressive, then 1 week, then 1 month, but it's all inside this overarching 3 month. So arguably, this entry is still valid, still in a 3 month zone, but we're going to get less of the immediate reaction that we've seen. Like so far, we've had mostly they've actually reacted off this level. And maybe they will. Maybe it's just like a today thing where we're just getting this strangely aggressive up move, but we'll go back more into this sideways PA after this where we do see things properly rejecting zones, but again, we shall see. D5, see there you go. That's another example. But again, we need to see what happens on this. It's a 3 months. It's just hit the 3 month level. It has a weekly just inside it, similar to what was the other one I just look at? A BNT. It's got stopped up here. Maybe it'll go to the 2 day supply up there. So it's also got a yearly level and perhaps a yearly supply or demand. And this is just an up and down. Can't really tell, but it's a yearly level up there as well. So again, this may or may not go. It just depends on the strength of the market, really. That's in some cases we're going to get little bounces like this. This is going to come back down, and then we're going to get a move up, or it's going to break down, or we're just going to get a green candle to go straight through everything. Like you don't really know. So again, it's just judging what you can and trading demand and supply as and when they're hit. Dent's another one, so it's another just hit the 3 month supply. So again, hasn't broken out or even through as yet. IGen. Okay, so this one has broken, so this is obviously run through weekly supply. Next weekly above is just sort of weekly, weekly, weekly on this. So again, this is something I would be more inclined to look for longs on because of the lack of supply on it, and then you've been the newer coins. So this potentially, again, I don't know if this is going to come back, but may have found that support on that weekly level there. This is something I would potentially be more inclined to look for a long on, a long on retest. So that's the other thing. Again, if we break supply, there's no reason you can't look for longs on retests. So this could actually have a 3 day demand down there. Actually, might have gone through that. Yeah, I really like to see this create a weekly demand to be more confident of looking for longs. I'd like to see it hold up here for the next few days. EPT again, I put a more aggressive long on. I think it did work in the first instance, but then it came back and went back through. So yeah, I think I just spotted that yesterday and kind of thought maybe this will get a drop off here back down into demand, but no such luck. And obviously it's a messy, risky chart, but it was worth a try. And then there's obviously this hourly up here. This is something I'll keep an eye on because I still think this is potentially going to be a decent short. So taken out the high over here. So a big pump taken out the high, and I suspect it's going to retrace more of this, but I was just a little bit too early on that. Fartcoin. This actually created a 2 month demand. So okay, so this again doesn't surprise me. We've gone through this level here now. So I just did mention this yesterday in the group. So one thing, so I had this alert set from way back when it made the top before. And what has happened, so I haven't gone through every single chart yet. I've gone through a lot of them, but not every single chart to know what's created new 2 month supply or demand. So you can see this closed above has created a new 2 month demand and has kind of tapped down off the top of that. So when the alert went yesterday, obviously then it becomes significantly higher risk if you're looking for shorts following a tap off that 2 month level there. So obviously, yeah, not surprisingly, this has now gone back higher in the zone and taken out that 4 hour level. Like really, I would have wanted that to hit, back here somewhere. I think I was looking at it around this point in time. I wanted it to come back and hit. But yeah, so it did give a bit of a reaction, but now it's gone higher. But I still think, I don't know, like the 2 month demand makes this more challenging. So I don't know. Let's see what reaction we'll get. Let's see what build up we get from here. I would like to have seen a bit more from this, I think. Anyway, grass, a really nice long on that. So again, this is sort of similar to the Alice structure as well. Like again, I had a more aggressive short on the 3 day, 5 day supply in here because it coincides with a monthly supply. And I think obviously the monthly's probably already been hit. I'm not sure if it's actually, maybe it's just been hit now. May. Yeah, so it's actually only been hit on this candle for the May. So that's just hit the new monthly supply. So again, it's worth looking for a more aggressive short on that. Although actually overarching, I quite like this structure, but it might just need a bit more sideways first before it does anything more significant. Let's take that one out to make it a little bit easier to see. Hi-Fi came off really hard, I know that. So again, I don't even know if that was an entry that could have been taken, but that obviously don't know if this is a delisting because that looks like a delisting kind of nasty wick. Um, but yeah, it's gone straight up into weekly supply and rejected straight down. HPOS, similar to how I've just described other structures, 5 day followed by weekly, followed by 2 weekly supply in there, and there's a 2 month level and there's a 3 month level. So there's just become, it's too many levels and too much guessing going on. So at this point, I'm probably now just going to have to stick with the high time frame levels. And then just see because like these waves are just so choppy down, like this could just I think we'll get. I mean, we've already seen some alts just run straight through everything, but maybe this pump that we've had today is going to be, or yesterday is going to be the impetus to make things like really, really just run through all the supply. But I'll stick with kind of probably just like alerting the high time frame zone, so like the 3 month in here. 3 months in many cases are kind of coinciding with the 2 days. In this case, it's tapped that 2 day, but in a lot of cases, we've got the 3 month level and then a 2 day just above. So some of those I've been alerting. Um, and yeah, the wickiness of this makes it again a bit harder. But yeah, so that's another possibility. Hype again, another supply. So this one, I'm not surprised, it's gone a bit higher again as well. It's 3 week, but then it has a 5 day inside it and 2 day. It's gone through mostly through the 2 day. Um, but again, could just keep going here. So I don't know. This is not something I particularly look for a short. It's a bit more like Bitcoin, like it could just break out. But this one maybe I'd look for a more aggressive long on it. Let me think. The long I'd had the long there from previously 3 day. Yeah, I don't love the structure of this area. I prefer it to come back there, but whether it gets there is another matter. In it, and yet another short. So this is it was a bit of a difficult one. It's got a 3 day and weekly supply in here, but it did swing fail the low. So again, this could just run, and it's very, very new. So if the market's going to get strong, this potentially is going to run back up through it. Also, just missed my long entry at the low here, which is kind of annoying. Um, but yeah, it's early days for that one. IP also had a very nice wick, so this one I had a daily alerted inside the weekly. So I don't know. Again, maybe I just need to look a little bit more at what the structure is here to see which are the better zones to be coming off. But at least this, had 12 hour. There's no actual daily supply throughout here, so hence it's just gone up to the next daily, the first daily it could find. It did have a decent drop on the daily. Yeah, so that was a decent short entry, but again, just need to see whether it's going to give another long in here. Okay, yeah, okay. Obviously, I mentioned yesterday. I think I just added that to the list because this was one of the ones that hadn't moved yet. So I was watching this 30-minute supply in here. So obviously, again, we're still pushing a little bit inside it. I still want to keep an eye on this because I still think, when this does dump, this is going to do a big dump because it's going to take out all these trend line stops. So I want to be ready for it, and that's why I wanted to keep it on the radar. Layer is, hit my weekly level, but is being slow off the mark. Ugh. We were trying to figure out why this had dumped, and I think we didn't really come to any conclusion, but somebody did say they thought it was an unlocking. So, if it is an unlocking and it's not anything more sinister, then maybe this can hold and actually just pick back up again, and it's not going to pull an arm, with the dev selling and go to zero. Uh, or drop 95% and not recover anytime soon. However, obviously lower time frame. I think it's made a 12-hour supply in there, or it's in an hour and 40 minutes, maybe it will. It's got a 4 hour, so obviously it's still chopping down. So just be a bit careful, give it some time, and give it wait for the structure to tell you when to look for long on this, where we are. But it's a decent area, weekly and the 61 fib. If it does drop, then we've got another weekly and the 78 fib below. But at the moment, it's not quite ready, but yeah, it's something for certainly to keep an eye on. Meme 5 was another one that hit daily demand. No idea what happened to that. Just got completely thrown off a cliff yesterday. Was in weekly supply and had dropped and then had ticked up a little bit higher in the zone. Yeah. Potentially look for another short. When and if it retests there, but I just kind of didn't like how clear or the lack of clearness on this chart. Um, so I put on a little bit anyway because obviously we don't have to take it if it just pounds straight through it. Yeah, there's not too many left on the list now. So Mudang, I know, also is one that has taken out. So this, I had a weekly supply Here it was a bit choppy, so that has, one of the few that has entirely taken out the zone. It's gone right back up into 3 month supply again. It's not the best 3 month because it's just mexy. I'm not sure if all the charts are going to show this 3 month level, but it did obviously have this daily zone just inside. So anyway, you can keep an eye on this around here, and again, if it keeps going, then we've got 2 week, 3 week supply here and another 2 week at the top. So I'll just alert that in case this is just going to be a complete runner. I just have so many alerts go, I can afford to be a little bit more generous on my resetting now because I've probably just need to check my numbers because I always say that and then um, suddenly I'll run out again. But yeah, that's certainly looking for a short entry on that, but just be a bit careful because obviously it's up 63% today and it's one of the ones that kind of outperformed even after yesterday having hit that supply, whereas a lot of the others have kind of at least slowed down a bit. Pepe is another one that's kind of pushed higher, so that hit a 3 month zone and is going up inside, what's that, a 4 day inside it. Um, so again, looking like it's stronger than a lot of other things at the moment. 3 week supply, so again, reset the alert in case it runs up to here. See, Bonk's just come in there. Peanut is in a monthly supply here, so again, I think it hasn't quite got through it yet, but not the cleanest, not the nicest monthly supply there, but again, it's a monthly, so I think it was worth having it alerted. But failing that, there's another possible 2 week up here, which you can look for shorts on. So I'm probably going to kind of grind to a halt on this in a bit. I'm going through these alts obviously very quickly. But non-lock 2 week supply. Yeah, so obviously I'm going through all these pretty quickly. Obviously I'm not short biased as yet, like these we've come up with a lot of momentum. But also overarchingly, what I'm looking for is those weekly 3 week demands. Let me just run through to the end of the list and then I can do like an outro with those summaries. Shell was one of the ones that actually hit. I actually kind of missed it from the stream the day before. So it actually hit a little bit earlier. So it did get a bit of reaction off the level, but it was also run through. And it wasn't the best zone to start with. Really, I would have wanted this to hit on the way down, not after it had hit demand. But I thought that maybe it was worth considering because it had just come into this 12-hour zone here, and I wanted it kind of ideally, maybe not all the way down there, but maybe just a little bit lower. Maybe on this 3 day, I might flip that up to a 3 day, um, 3 day level a bit higher. I think that's why I was looking for the possibility of a lower high for it to then come back down into this zone. Siren's come up and taken out all-time highs. So this again, you're just looking for structure to get. Is this going to hold here and get a retest and then just take off, or is it going to be a swing fail of all-time high and break down? It's just that it's too early to tell. But yeah, just keep an eye on that for potential shorts or longs. SPX is another one, just hit monthly level there. It's also in like various weeklies, but again, I can delete those. Vine we talked about already. VRA was one that went up extremely high, so this was a really nice one from the stream yesterday, actually, that I'd said, it come up into the 2 month, and I had an alert set for the 3 month, and then obviously it pushed up to the 5 day inside the 3 month. And in the stream yesterday, it was kind of already up here, and I said, that'd be the next alert, and that'd be the area I would look at like more confidently for shorts now. And then the next thing I knew, it fell off a cliff. And again, don't know if that's a delisting or something like that. I have set an alert here for 12-hour supply. Like, I don't love the fact that it's got this big, obviously, red candle there. So this could come up a lot higher in the zone. So just be a bit careful on that if you're looking for short re-entries on that. And then longs, like it hit 12-hour demand, but I kind of wanted it a little bit lower. When is probably going to have gone through the zone. Yeah, that's very much gone through the zone. So that's done kind of a significant kind of breakout there. So I need to chart that again. So this was again, and I actually said this, I said this, I think, in the stream yesterday. It was, these are areas I don't really like having re-entries on. So when you get this drop, so if you were looking at here for a short, when you get that initial drop, then you can look for a short on the retest. And that's aggressive short. In this case, your demand's further below, so it's not so bad, but you're looking at least for this to come down into the kind of next demand area. but I will look for an ABC. It is like commonly, unless the C is looking really weak or unless the C has broken demand, I typically don't want to look for a DE on the short side because commonly you get ABC and then if we're going to move up it will just go again. But it's less common that you get a DE first. So I'll draw A, B, C, D, E. That is much less common. It's possible, but it's less common. So I tend to be less inclined to do this and have a second short entry after the initial short entry. It does depend on the structure, and again, I think this was a 2-day supply, and I think I was just considering it, but then again, I was conscious of the trend line stop, so that was with hindsight was a bit of a stupid entry. Um, this is kind of an interesting chart because it really is nowhere near. I think the other thing is the other things we're considering is that whether this was a retest following a breakdown of this orange level, which was previous all-time low. It was kind of like, is this going to just reject here and just go back to zero? I think that was my other kind of potential logic there, but I can't really remember now. It's a 5-day supply up there, followed by week, 2-week, monthly. Should probably put that a bit higher actually. Use alerts in a little bit reactively. 5-day supply followed by 2, 3-week, 2-month levels. Yeah, so again, like I'm not overly surprised about the structure of that one. XMR is still in, so I had an alert here for 30-minute supply, which I think I talked about previously. It had way too much consolidation before it gets here. Like you wanted that to come up a lot quicker. So again, it's pushing a little bit higher now. It's very possible this is going to break, so I wouldn't necessarily really look at that. It's up to you if you want to keep an eye on it. And then finally, there is Zerebro. Ready for me? Again, was a more aggressive one, and for the same reason. So there's also the A, B, C, D, well, kind of A, B, C, D, E that I've talked about. So we've got A, B, C, and this would be a D, E. So again, it's a bit of a risky one. This again, I was more considering it because it had made a 4 or 5-day supply in there. Is also coming off the 3-month level there. It is like it's a 3-month on the radian from when it opened, so it's possibly not an ideal zone. And also, so obviously it can go higher in this 5-day, there's a 4-day up there, and there's an untested 12-hour above. So this is kind of more lower time frame entries than anything else. Anyway, so that's that. So basically, the long and short of all the alts and my sort of outro, basically, for this stream is so for alts is basically we need this week to close strong. Go to the others chart. 24.2 at the moment. So we need this week to close strong. We need this week to not close as a swing failure. It needs to close as a proper breakout. It needs to close with a weekly demand, ideally, although we do already have a 4-day. And then we need to see, those tests hold. The risks we have are still, in many cases, zones below that weren't tested. The fact we now have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that we could get, a 61, even if we're staying in an uptrend, a 61 fib move before another move up. So that's kind of the bigger risk. Alts, the risk we have, like now obviously is a time to be slightly more wary of shorts, and just give it maybe a day or so at least to settle down and see if we're going to be able to go back to trading like up and down on alts and have both ways work for the most part. Obviously anything that hits a very high time frame alert, so 3-month supply and stuff like that, don't necessarily think it's going to reject immediately because it can obviously go a lot higher in the zone if it wants. The outcomes when you look at the alts were very, very mixed. Like, in some cases they're going much higher in the zones. In other cases, they're still at least holding at the level of the zone, and we still need to see whether we're going to get those rejections or not. On Bitcoin, the summary is kind of like, well, so US dollar dominance we've got now approaching weekly demand. We're just tapping off weekly demand there. We've got Korea is a bit messy. We've got the BTC US dollar pair and CME are, up in this 8-12 hour supply inside 3-day, inside the overall monthly. And again, not an area I want to look for longs at the moment. I really want to just see more price develop. And these are the long entries I'm interested in if we do drop, and then potentially, obviously, we've got shorts um, that could happen either all-time high. We could get a swing fail. We could get a swing fail if there's little double tops in here. And obviously, then my last level of interest is this 8-12 hour supply that we have at the current price. But really just wait for structure to tell you this is going to break down. You have time. You don't have to phone away. Look at these daily candles; they give you time. Maybe it'll throw one giant candle down. The chances are it won't, um, but it will give you structure to enter before doing that. ETH obviously was the more challenging one. It's come up very aggressively, but ETH BTC is also now in weekly supply. Ether US dollar, I wouldn't have minded a little bit higher. Um, but it's the challenges, and I can argue the same in the other direction. And when we got to this level, I wouldn't have minded this a little bit lower. So it makes it slightly more difficult. We didn't quite hit this 3 month demand at the low, and we haven't quite hit the 3 month supply at the high, which maybe will just be annoying. But in a perfect world, I would like this a little bit higher. I would like to see it hit that 3 month level at 2,600, potentially close the CME gap that's a little bit higher. And then obviously, as I've said, we've got the 61 fib and other zones potentially a lot higher on that. But again, lots of momentum on this. Just be careful about FOMOing into shorts. Again, just wait for structure to kind of tell you, wait for this 4 hour to get tested. Maybe it's going to hold that monthly. But yeah, don't be FOMOing in and reverse knife catching because as you can see, it's just running straight through zones where it wants to. So yeah, that's about it. Please like and subscribe if you're interested. I will try and keep you updated here on the Telegram channel if anything changes on the data. Like if we start seeing, I mean, you can follow the ETF data yourself, but if you start seeing, um, ETF buying on the Arkham data set, if you start to see, are we on the coinalized data? Um, the CVDs start to get better and spot buying start to come in. Like you don't really want to see spot buying at tops. Lower time frame, this is having a bit of spot buying, but the higher time frame, we're still very, very poor on the CVD. Coinbase does seem to have some spot buying coming in a little bit now, but maybe probably not very much in the bigger picture. Once you zoom out, not loads. And what we really want to see, if we're going to be supporting our short buyers even more, is a lot of longs coming in at the top and not so many shorts. As soon as too many people start shorting, then we're potentially going to get another squeeze. But yeah, please like and subscribe if you're interested. Please feel free to put in my Telegram channel any alt requests that you have. I hope I haven't run that through that too quickly because there's just a lot to cover, and I also wanted to do it for myself, just so I get a sense of what's breaking out. What we saw on the alts, I guess, is a few things have broken out and broken supply, or even or we just got higher in the zones. Like maybe two or three had actually broken zones, not many. And then others have just gone higher in the zones, but or are consolidating at the level. So I don't necessarily think this is like indicating a massive breakout on alts yet, but it could lead up to that. We could be having that, seeing that momentum coming back in. Now we've had this move on Bitcoin, maybe we get some sideways on Bitcoin and alts really do run. So I'll keep you posted, and I hope you've got in some of the long entries that I gave you over the last couple of days because some of those are performing really, really well. And yeah, have a great day. Goodbye.